Joe was talking about the multiple urban stresses, right? And you've got to think holistically, and this is a public health issue. Rachel's talking about how air quality makes climate change action tangible, because it's immediate, tangible, and local, and creates the political space for amazing things to happen. Lucy was talking about it's a human issue, and we've got to be bold. We've got to act quickly, but it's not sufficient to think of it just at the project level. We've got to be thinking strategically. Tom, really interesting. I thought what's most fascinating for me was, for those in the room perhaps, was the really significant impact of construction emissions and boilers, right? And the fact that eventually local action is necessary but not sufficient. You've got to think big. So I suppose a kind of key question for me is, given that the imperative is so immediate, why has nothing happened today, or why is it taken to this point for this to be such a serious issue? Is there anybody like to comment on this?
Happy to.
Rachel.
But I think everyone was intaking the breath there, weren't they?
They'll probably say the same thing. Yeah.
Well, good. The challenge now. Well, my first thought on that is that I think an awful lot has happened. So yeah, you do see some real successes. I think the blurb, if I can call it that, for this event talked about the Clean Air Act of the 1950s. So I think when things become a real problem, the ability to act and tackle them is absolutely there and is ours. Why hasn't more happened on climate to date? Oh, how long have we got? I don't think it's immediate enough for people. I don't think the pain is kind of immediate and tangible enough for people. The real problem with climate change is by the time it is, it may well be too late, or we might not even recognise that that's actually the kind of problem. And in terms of why haven't we done more on the current air pollution problem, and in fact with the climate change as well, I think people recognise, if you ask them, mostly people recognise it's an issue, they see it's something that needs to be tackled, but when it comes up against other daily just necessities, priorities, yes, it's important, but are you willing to get out of your car? Well, maybe now I'm not. Yes, it's important. Are you willing to give up your car? Well, I'm willing to not use it most of the time, but I still want it. So I think people recognise the importance of climate and air quality, but they don't. It's still vying in there with all sorts of other priorities and just getting through the day.
So at what point is the political pressure strong enough to actually get people out of their cars?
If I can just sort of chip in a bit, just following what you said, it's interesting. I think we can draw a parallel. If you look at the supermarket plastic bag phenomenon, it's a different issue, but I think we can line it to that cultural, behavioural shift I talked about, and a bit about peer pressure. If you look at most, I don't live in London anymore, but you look at most people going to do their supermarket shop, if they're not having it delivered by Ocado, which is obviously bad, and it gives you the little green symbol when it says, you're grouping deliveries in your area, but say they're actually going to a shop to do their shopping. I see hardly anyone now who actually has a plastic bag, and I think almost there's been two things there. It's making people pay for something, so making it more affordable to do the right thing by the environment, because at the end of the day, even though a plastic bag might be 5p, it's still 5p and it all adds up, and you think, oh, I don't want to pay for that. So people will then change their behaviour. I think it's two things. Firstly, it's, as you say, people need to get through their day. You need to make the infrastructure easy. People are going to do what is easiest for them to be able to get through their life. So, provision needs to be there for good public transport. It needs to be there for, free cycling around London instead of an annual membership. Whatever it is, it needs to be cheap and it needs to be easy to get that behavioural shift. And I think we can do it, the bag thing being a good example.
So, Joe, from your analysis of looking at different socioeconomic groups, is that
This is a question I get asked a lot, is why hasn't air pollution been solved over the last... Because local air quality management started in the late 90s. We had the Environment Act in 1995. So why are we now, having passed our air quality deadlines, when the air quality objectives were supposed to be met, when the EU limit values were supposed to be met, having passed those deadlines, how are we in this situation? And it basically comes down to a lack of political will. It comes down to a lack of political will at all levels. I'm sure you can speak to this too. I'm sure maybe your local authority is more proactive, and it certainly seems like it. But that has been the problem. At a national level,
there has not been sufficient recognition of air pollution as, given the significance from a public health perspective, it has fallen shy of tackling transport. It's really hasn't tackled transport at all, really. Now they've joined forces with Department for Transport. DEFRA's joined forces with Department for Transport under the Joint Air Quality Unit. There is much more of a push now. They're working together, but it is this siloing of different disciplines within different departments at a national level and at a local level. And at a local level, with local air quality management, when part of the problem is that at a national level, the responsibility for solving the problem has always been pushed down to a local authority level where they've been under-resourced and underpowered. But also, there's been a lack of political will in a local authority level because they've never had a statutory duty to meet the air quality objectives. It's always been to work towards the air quality objectives, and that's always undermined the political will and the clout of air quality, if you like, in terms of raising it up the agenda. So I think partly it's a lack of political, but that's because it's such a difficult problem to solve. It's a wicked problem, as they call them. So
it's like classic require for joined up action. So
absolutely.
So what about leadership then? So what's the relative importance of leadership at a European, national, city, borough level? You know, do you have to get all of those in alignment? And to what extent has it been helpful for Camden to have a mayor at City Hall who said, "This is I'm going to hang my legacy on sorting this out"?
I think it's been extremely helpful for us in Camden to have that sort of unified London-wide voice. Lots of the projects that we're supporting on are ones that are led by GLA or the Mayor's Office. Lots of the projects that we're doing in Camden build on what's happening at that level as well. So I think if we didn't really have that momentum from London as a whole, it'd be really difficult to get further traction and to get people understanding what the issue is. We've heard already that the comms campaign from the Mayor's Office and from City Hall is very effective in communicating to people what the issues are with air quality. And I think, from my point of view, that mayoral campaign really was one of the key things which elevated air quality as being a political issue which competing parties want to be seen to be doing something about. So that gives us much more leverage in undertaking projects because we have a mandate to actually deliver things now. But it is difficult when there isn't a unified voice between local authority and central government level as well. So yeah, we do need to have more coherent, cohesive action of all strands.
I do wonder as well how important it is to join up those different agendas. And it's interesting that you said that a significant proportion of your air quality problem is also relating to the construction sector and also the way that we're heating our buildings. Yeah. And of course you've got this transition away from burning fossil fuels for carbon reasons towards zero carbon grid, taking fossil fuels out of the city. And I wonder whether actually you might end up at this tipping point where for air quality and climate and energy security and affordability reasons, you reach that tipping point where it becomes the obvious thing. Of course we want net zero buildings and transport, and it just becomes the obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can just widen it out to the audience, because we've got a whole bunch of really clever people in the audience who've got lots of interesting insights. We've got some roving mics. I might just... who's got the roving mic? Aha, fantastic. Can we just head down that way with a microphone, please, to check over there? We'll take a couple of questions and then we'll comments.
Hi, yep. Whoa. So that was very interesting, thank you. I have this sort of question which I formulated very early on, and I'm very keen to ask all of you. So we've just seen 4 very good presentations, tackling the issues of pollution, air quality, things like that. But I noticed none of you mentioned a key thing, I think. And so so we've got the ultra-low emission zone now coming into London. That's great, you're tackling motorists head on. Okay, so some of these motorists are going to be like, okay, I can't drive now. I'm going to take the underground. And I just read, articles recently where the underground air quality is 30 times, or as much as 30 times worse than the busiest street in London. So my question is, okay, we've got this focus on the external pollution or whatever, but the tube is so bad that it's just completely contradictory. Why is there not so much work going on that side?
It could be a classic example of unintended consequences. I don't know, Tom, whether you've looked at this from a Camden perspective.
I have seen it, yeah. I mean, I think the report noted Hampstead Station as being the worst, which is in Camden, so so yeah, it's not great.
So sort it.
So yeah, I mean, from our point of view as a borough, we always try and promote active transport, so cycling or walking where possible, but obviously we try and support use of public transport as well instead of people driving their own vehicles. I suppose for infrastructure like that, it's more down to TfL or the operators to try and find a way to reduce the problem. I can't really comment on the technical solutions for that, but yeah, no, it was a bit scary reading that one.
Yeah, I agree in that it is a problem. It's something, yeah, it is difficult because if you move people off the underground and into their cars, you're not going to solve the wider problem. I mean, one of the things I would say above ground is that some of the people exposed to most pollution might be those who are actually on the bus, and if electrifying your bus fleet then is an absolute win-win. And also, now I've got to be careful because I've got the experts right here. But the research I've looked at around the levels of pollution you're exposed to in kind of a car, on a bike and walking, actually the car isn't pollution free and can be the worst. The cyclists might actually end up getting most exposure because the respiration rates are higher. But your benefits from active exercise are an order of magnitude more than the negative impact of the air quality. So I've kind of, like a classic politician, avoided answering the actual question, but it's because it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, the levels of pollution in the tube, and I think that will be the same in any underground metro system, are awful. And I don't know what the solution is.
You could also talk about indoor air pollution. I mean, we talk about ambient air pollution separate from indoor air pollution, separate from workplace exposure. It's completely isolated, and what we really need to be doing is looking at public exposure in the whole. But it's such a complicated thing. We can't even, as you say, tackle ambient air pollution. When we get indoors, we're looking at concentrations at much, much higher levels, but because it's much harder to regulate indoors, we haven't even gone there yet. And then workplace exposure, it's not, they look at the underground from a workplace exposure perspective for the people that are working there, but the averaging period, they call it, for the time that a person is on the platform and likely to be travelling the underground, doesn't necessarily meet with the exposure thresholds for the air quality objectives. So therefore we're not looking at it from that perspective. Plus it's considered to be indoors, so it's not ambient air. So, but you're right, from a public health perspective, we need really to be thinking about public health exposure in the house.
I guess you've got to think about your day in the life. You know, how many minutes you're all doing this activity in this location. But it's a classic example of the need for systems thinking, isn't it? And thinking about changing the whole system. So yeah. Any other? I've got a couple down here. Sorry, and then chap at the back.
If you think of the sort of climate change issue as being a global issue, then we've got to remember that the UK's carbon footprint is something like 200 or 300 times its size, whatever the figure is. So if we're going to reduce that and bring all that pollution that we dump over the rest of the world into UK, are we going to be able to cope, improving a terrible situation at the moment and then adding on top of that extra burden of reducing our carbon footprint?
That's a really interesting one. So it's not just about displacing our carbon emissions, but also the air quality challenge, right? You know, half of the air quality problems in Guangzhou maybe are about the stuff, you know, that I'm buying on my internet shopping, which is coming from Guangzhou, which I found when I was tracking my daughter's internet shopping, and I realised that this T-shirt I bought for like 10 quid, and I thought, where is it coming from? It's a warehouse in Guangzhou, flight departure. I thought, oh my goodness. Okay, so we actually data about that displaced set of emissions is really quite powerful. But how does that play to environmental justice? You know, where does that play out in a big political debate?
Actually, yeah. I mean, talking about globalisation, how do we solve that really? And it's yeah, that's a very big issue. I'm going to hand over to somebody else.
Maybe.
First of all, that's a too big one for me.
Well, no, I was just going to, you know, clearly I don't have an answer. It is a big issue. I mean, I think just linked to climate change and the wider issue, you know, this is where you look at the likes of some of the countries in the world that are on a serious growth trajectory, be that China, India, etc., and look back at, you know, the UK being in its imperialistic state through the Industrial Revolution. We were burning whatever fossil fuels we wanted in the name of progress. So and we're saying, oh gosh, there's going to be billions of people in these countries. Hang on, we need to be doing renewables. We need to slow it down. They're saying, well, hang on a second, you guys have done all that. So it's a real problem. They look at us and say, well, you were hypocritical because you went round the world plundering and all the rest of it, and now we're trying to grow. It's our turn. So. Yeah, I genuinely don't know what the issue is, but you look like you might know.
In terms of what's the solution, I am a firm believer that we absolutely can solve this. The ability to do it is not the problem at all. It's the will. So, and I don't think we'd be better off, we'd be worse off if we create all these solutions. But in terms of the consumption, if you're buying really cheap clothes or furniture or food, there's a problem. The amount we consume now compared to a decade ago, compared to 3 decades ago, is enormous, and it doesn't make us any happier. So to go back to a situation where we're consuming less but better, I don't think is an issue at all. And so, for example, everyone should do a 4-day working week, 3-4-day working week. We have more time, we have less money, we consume less. I don't see that as a bad trajectory for human progress. I see it as a solution to climate problems. It would reduce the amount of kind of transport. Anyway, I'm waxing lyrical. I think there is a solution. I think
it's interesting. I should come back to your point, Tom, about road emissions as well. And actually, I'm wondering, with the rise of internet shopping, whether actually, that's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, because arguably fewer people are driving around, but then you've got more Amazon deliveries, and how's technology going to shape the way that we are creating carbon emissions and air pollution, and how does that fit with your voters? Well, your voters, but the voters in Camden.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. People have more access to the things they want than they've ever had before, and from our point of view, it's really difficult. We don't want to limit the extent to which people can live their lives and enjoy things they want to enjoy, but yeah, it's difficult to manage the impacts of that. I think looking at what we're doing as an authority and within our own sphere of influence, I guess, we are trying to look for innovative, not necessarily technology-focused solutions, but where businesses or small businesses are starting up to offer non-vehicular transportation for goods, so prioritising or encouraging the use of consolidation centres or distribution centres on the sort of periphery of the city, and then having electric bikes or other electric vehicles or other sort of innovative concepts that we're not yet explored to try and get things further into the city, and that's something we're trying to open up as well. But I think there's probably a lot to come from technological solutions. We'll probably see that drones and other.
I wonder whether actually, the sharing economy might have a role here. Just, just borrow your neighbour's drill rather than going down the road to buy, to buy another one, or to, there must be lots more we can do with the assets we've got. I'm going to take sort of 3 questions. We've got 10 minutes to go, and I realise we're going to have to continue the conversation outside over a glass of wine. So, the chap here has asked several times, and maybe take women over there, and maybe we'll take one from over this side as well. Chap over there.
Hi, I'm assuming when we talk about air pollution, we're not just talking about clean air in the UK, it's obviously got to be in other countries as well. Sure. My roots are from India and Africa. In India, it's from northeast state called Jharkhand. Jharkhand is the major mining state of India. Just like any country, they're going to have the major mining region. But when I was growing up, especially in the last 5-10 years, you see all this talk about renewables, you see all this talk about the fossil fuel stuff, and the air pollution in that state was getting worse. There was a lot of mines in that area, And I was like trying to figure out, because okay, people are talking here about pollution. I was like, okay, what's these products? What's the source? You know, looking at the supply chain, especially if I'm sort of right in the neck of the woods where all the stuff is coming from. When I come to the UK and then actually follow the supply chain, then I found to my horror that I wasn't following the supply chain for fossil fuels. Jharkhand is a major mining state for lithium and bauxite and cobalt and all the other minerals you require for EV cars, solar panels, wind turbines. So then, of course, I follow the supply chain to the UK, and I was like, wow, these people are moaning about the air pollution in London. Come to Delhi. Then you can actually learn how to do yoga, because you'll have to really learn how to breathe there, right? My question is that everyone's got these labels: clean, green, zero. And rightfully we're saying fossil fuels need to be divested. But it seems that we've divested from one frying pan into the other, because we're not looking at the implications of the mining of the minerals, of the human rights abuses, of the women, the children, the men, of the depletion of the water resources for those people. But it seems we're not applying like for like, because India is some other over there stuff. Peru is some other over there stuff.
It's an excellent point. It kind of touched on the earlier points about environmental justice and being responsible for the full set of emissions or impacts, human, social impacts all the way down through the supply chain. Does anybody want to kind of come back on that?
I have actually been to Delhi, and currently are working in Delhi on mitigations to solve air pollution in Delhi, and I recognise what a significant problem that is and the task that we've set ourselves. There are multiple sources, there are multiple issues, and it's not really, when you compare it to the UK, it's a different class, it's a different league. So I do take on board your concerns, and I recognise also that what you're saying is actually saying to us, be more holistic. You know, it's about sustainability. It's about thinking about things in the round, not from a national perspective, not from a local perspective, but from a global perspective. And I think I totally agree with you. We do need to be thinking about life cycle analysis. We need to be thinking about whole life of products, not cradle to grave, but thinking about the whole gambit. So yeah, I totally take on board
Rachel,
that.
you've got experience of working with cities all over the world. To what degree are cities thinking collectively and holistically about those issues?
Oh, Well, I mean, what I was going to say was I think those are some really important principles. I think you look at the limits to growth. Right, the numbers have changed, but the principles are the same, which is when you try a tech fix, you're just swapping one problem for another, and sooner or later, exponential growth and finite resources results in a problem, and quite a significant one. So I think it's a really important point that actually to really solve and be sustainable, we need to do more than just switch from fossil fuels to something else. It needs to, we need to think harder and dig a little bit deeper than that. How cities are thinking about this, it's difficult. I think we're really inspired by the leadership from some of our cities in terms of thinking about emissions beyond their boundaries. That's great. They're kind of coming to us and pushing on it. But mostly they're very practical, pragmatic. They're focusing on what's within their city that they can control and they can kind of tackle.
Okay. What I would say is we've got a series of these events coming up. There will be another one, I think, in April on another challenging topic. And so keep watching the Happel Foundation website to find more details. A summary of this and some edited bits of video will appear on the website in due course as well. But I just wanted to say thank you all to you for coming, because without you, we don't have an event. And thank you very much indeed to our speakers, and please thank them in the usual way.